Ready?
Ready?
For sure? All right, 1, 2, 3. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Chalkboard History. I have been cajoled and coerced this morning into talking about a book that I wrote. I don't know. It's probably been 12 or 13 years ago. So
Yeah.
I guess, where is it? Baptism of Fire.
Voila.
So since I'm almost done with new books, 2 volumes now, I guess we can reflect on...
Well, you said recently this was the most fun to write, which I thought was interesting. So I'd like to hear about that. But also, this book was really birthed out of your first book, because when you were writing for Cause and for Country, you came across these 3 regiments who were brand new, recruited in the summer of 1864. They received their baptism of fire at Franklin, and as it turns out, they end up on really important places on the battlefield, so that the role they play is significant in the outcome of that. So they've not been talked about very much, and you decided their story needed to be told. So talk a little bit about why you felt compelled to write about them and why it was so much fun.
Well, it was probably my co-author, Rich Rupp, who his great-grandfather was in the 183rd Ohio, so the guy in the middle, that's Pete Rupp. And they were, he had a buddy named Freeman Stokes. Pete was 18, Freeman Stokes was 16. His mother actually had to sign off on the document so he could enlist. And when we worked on the first book, we were cutting through old stories and myths, like, stories about Hood and everything else, and it was honestly often a very Confederate-centric storyline. Confederates. Hood decides to attack Confederate. Confederates attack Confederate. Cleburne's men break through Confederate. Todd Carter dies Confederate. And there was a few Federal soldiers, and they were brave and they fought. And Emerson Updike saved the day. And we learned enough in the first book that there probably wasn't quite as much to the Updike story, in fact, as what had been said for a good while. So Rich just said, if we don't write this book, nobody's going to. It's never going to be as popular or sell like the first one might. But is that why we're writing? Are we writing to be popular, or are we writing because
It needs to be written?
We think that it really matters. And I think what came out of it for me was the story was really great to write, but it recalibrated interpretation. Because when that book came out, we had been managing the Carter House about 2 years. So actually, I think I started writing it about the time we began to manage Carter House. So we started reshaping the tour right away, which was that Updike did not save the day on his own. I mean, in fact, I don't think anybody saved the day. I think it was truly an amazing set of events and circumstances by Federal troops that held off this just massive Confederate attack and subsequent breakthrough. But yeah, they're new guys, so they're all 64 guys, which itself is a
But they
story.
have seasoned commanders. So if we were to start from east to west and start maybe with the 175th, they're the first of these regiments to arrive in the Middle Tennessee area. They get here in October.
They get that crap duty. They're working on the railroad, and they're basically post troops. Some of them are in Columbia, but a bunch of them are on these blockhouses, which had been set up in 63 and 64 to protect the railroad. And I know at one point Rich and I were like, whoever thought we were going to have to be like railroad engineers to figure out where these blockhouses were and why these guys were there. And I think that part of the book, for a lot of people, it's not like it's super fun and romantic and it's so gallant. This is the crap work that soldiers often have to do when they're not fighting, or in between this place and another. It's some of it's just backbreaking stuff.
Yeah, it's not always glory.
Yeah.
And a lot of those guys
mostly it's not glory.
Yeah. And some of those guys even get captured. They're fending off Confederate cavalry for about a month, and some of them get taken. One of those is a guy named Thomas Hemmings. Talk a little bit about him.
Oh, Hemmings was wild because, we were going to where the companies were raised, and they were most of the 175th Ohio guys came out of rural counties in south central Ohio, but I mean there were some from other areas, but Highland County was one of them, and that I remember. But Hemmings was interesting because I was doing like census work. You know, I was like, okay, who was this guy? Was he a farmer? Or was he a school teacher? Whatever. And I was looking at, they lived in Washington Courthouse. That was the town. And his father was Madison Hemmings. And I thought, oh my God.
That sounds familiar.
And I'm like, oh my God. And when you look, this is the 1870 census. So he's dead by the, Thomas is, because he got captured and he died. Well, Madison Hemmings' mother was Sally Hemings, who had children with Thomas Jefferson. And on the 1870 census, it actually says next to Madison, this man is Thomas Jefferson's son. And I was like, oh my goodness. So Thomas Jefferson's grandson was in a white unit.
And nobody knew.
Well, nobody knew because Sally Hemings, I think, was only 1/8 black. So one of her, like I think on her mother's side. So Madison must have been quite light, and Thomas passed for a white guy and got captured by, of all people, Nathan Bedford Forrest's cavalry, and then died in a camp in Mississippi. He's buried in an unknown grave. So, but yeah, they were interesting. But the other two units were, I mean, they're all interesting for different reasons. But the COs, the commanding officers, were quite a cast of characters. I mean, Dan McCoy of the 175th Ohio was a veteran, been wounded at Chickamauga. He was in the 24th Ohio. And then Robert Bradshaw, who was the 44th Missouri commander, had been with the 25th Missouri and was at Shiloh on the first day. So, you know, he was pretty seasoned. And then the CO of the 183rd Ohio was a guy named George Washington Hogue.
And he's Eastern Theater mostly,
right? So he'd fought in the 126th Ohio and had been all over the Shenandoah Valley. Well, he fought at Fisher's Creek like in September of 64, and then got command of the regiment, so he got jerked out of the Shenandoah and then had to raise this brand new unit. But the second in command of the 183rd was also interesting, Mervyn Clark, who was literally a kid.
He's 21, right?
He was 17 when he enlisted, and he became a sergeant, I think, when he was 18. He was a captain when he was 19 or 20. He was in the 7th Ohio. Those guys fought all over. They were at Gettysburg, and then they got mustered out. And then he got back in. Well, actually, I take that back. He got mustered out in 64 in the early stages of the Atlanta campaign. And then he ends up as the lieutenant colonel of the 183rd. So, yeah, all these green guys. And the one thing that everyone, you know, we hear lots of stories about, you know, all the Yankees that got drafted and all this. These units were not draftees. I learned during this process that guys who were drafted were never put into new units. I never found any. Draftees were usually filtered into existing units.
So you could keep an eye on them? I mean, it was the supposition that they're going to...
They put them with the veterans because the draftees were completely unreliable. I mean, you never knew what you were going to get. Substitutes as well. But these guys were all volunteers. And so... even the green guys had signed up. Now, they had signed up because they were going to get a bounty. They didn't want to be drafted. But there's such an age discrepancy. So you see a lot of guys in these units who were 18, 19 years old because, you know, they were of age.
Yeah.
But then you also see the guys who are like 35 and 38 and 39 who have not served because of their age. They might married, you know, kids, whatever. And they finally enlist.
Well, and in the 175th, there's a father who comes with his two boys, William Bogan, right? Am I saying his last name right? He's here with his two kids, and he's 44, 45, has a whole slew of kids back at home. And
when I saw their names and ages, I suspected that one was possibly the father, and I knew he was killed. So I knew William Bogan was killed. And I believe it said he was 44. And then I saw the other one. I was like, and you look at the census record, and I'm like, oh my God. It was actually the dad with his two kids. They all enlisted at the same time. And, you know, all of the guys with a very small exception, are all unknowns. I think all of the guys who were killed in these units at Franklin, they ended up in Murfreesboro, but they're all in unknown graves, like Bogan.
Well, because nobody knew them. I mean, so unless you have somebody from their unit who's just been enlisted with them burying them, there's not going to be much overlap. 183rd is interesting because there's a lot of immigrants in that
Germans.
Regiments, largely German.
They came out of over the Rhine, which was in Cincinnati. Very ethnic, some Irish, but yeah, some of those guys I know didn't speak English.
Right, so they had to have German commanders.
I think they had bilingual company commanders, who could shout
Translate.
out. There are two guys, I'm trying to think, in the 183rd Ohio. Well, Ferdinand Harrencourt, like we talk about Todd Carter all the time. Ferdinand Harrencourt was a sergeant in the 183rd Ohio, who was, again, a 3-year guy. He'd been in the 9th Ohio, which is an all-German unit. Harrencourt was badly wounded at Franklin. He was evacuated that night, ended up for a short time in a hospital in Nashville, but he died at his home. He died at his mother's home, just north of Cincinnati. So if you've ever heard the Todd Carter story and you're like, oh, that's fantastic, so is Ferdinand Harrencourt, except they didn't move him from a couple of 100 yards outside his house to his house. They actually hauled him off the battlefield, got him to Nashville, and ran him up by train to Cincinnati, and he didn't die until like January 10th. He's actually buried at Spring Grove Cemetery, which is where Jacob Cox is buried.
Oh, wow.
It's this beautiful cemetery, and when I went to, because I tracked him down, his tombstone is all in German.
Oh.
His burial record is logged in a book, all in German. And so, yeah, they were really, they defied those sort of gross stories I've heard about, all these Yankees are being forced to fight. Typical lost cause nonsense. These guys were volunteering. And I think a lot of those Germans especially, they hated slavery. They hated the rebellion. They really did. And then there's I'm thinking about the 44th Missouri. The only reason they ever got here was because William Rosecrans had raised 10 regiments. He was authorized to raise 10 regiments to fight bushwhackers.
Yeah, Missouri was not a good place to be.
And these guys, because the bushwhackers were going after Unionists and Germans and Irish, who tended to be more Union-leaning, and they were not happy about the fact that they got shuttled to Tennessee to help defend this area against Hood. One of the episodes I lay out early in the book is Bloody Bill Anderson massacring some of these Missouri troops. And it was another unit, 43rd Missouri. Could have easily been the 44th.
Yeah, because they had just been mustered, right?
Right. And they just ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, they took wounded soldiers, recovering soldiers, off a train, laid them on the tracks, ran the train over them.
God.
Then they massacred the 43rd when they showed up because they heard about the trouble. And they cut their throats, cut their heads off, cut their tongues off.
Scalping?
And Jesse James was there. And one of the, there was a guy who few federal soldiers showed up a few days later. And I mean, one of the accounts where they'd cut the soldiers' genitals off and shoved them in his mouth.
Oh my God.
And I was like, yeah, Lord. So yeah, and Bill Anderson got killed about a month later. I mean, he got what he deserved. But Jesse James, to many people, is like a folk hero. He was a murdering little thug who later, robbed a bunch of banks, and some people thought he was cool. But that was all part of that crazy kind of world that these guys came out of. And then, they all end up at Franklin. Literally side by side by side.
Yeah.
In just the strangest set of circumstances.
And Robert Bradshaw's interesting. He, again, another career guy. He had some time with his guys, and he had been putting them through the paces. I don't think that made him terribly popular with them.
Yeah, they didn't like him. They one man said after he was wounded at Franklin that it was they were not wishing that he was dead, but they made it very clear that they didn't really miss him.
But his training paid off. I mean, really, when push came to shove that day.
Bradshaw is, I think of all of the men that I really got to know a lot about, he has to be, or had to be, like guys that I knew who fought in World War II. He did his job. He came home. He never talked about it. As far as I know, he went to one reunion. He lived until 1927. But he was a badass on the battlefield. He really was. He got wounded 7 times at Franklin.
They thought he was dead.
Yeah,
they left him behind thinking he was dead.
He laid on the battlefield for 2 or 3 days. He spent months recovering at the home of a Union-leaning family whose name, I can't think of her name. I finally found her in a newspaper years after the book was published. And
he's reported dead. It goes back to the newspapers, right?
Yeah. They didn't know he was alive until they came through after the Battle of Nashville and they found him. But he was in Franklin until, about right now. I don't think he left until early July, and he was there when they mustered out. Yeah, he was quite something else. But they all were, and I thought that they were important because what happened when the Confederates broke through in the middle, so Claiborne and Brown's division, if you're familiar with the battle, and the Confederates blow up Wagner's advance line, and then they gash the center, the main line. They knock back 3 or 4 regiments, and they hit this secondary line, which Jacob Cox had created because he didn't want the new guys on the main line. Right. And there's about 2,000 of them back there. The 183rd Ohio's probably got 600, and I think the 44th has got about 600 or 700, and then the 175th was down to like 500 because a bunch of them had gotten captured. So 600 or 700, 600, and 500 or 600. So anyways, the Confederates hit them, and they didn't run. And it's a combination of things. They didn't run. They held their ground. The Confederates slammed into them. They, I think, were already spent. They were running out of steam. Emerson Updike, to his deathbed, insisted that he had saved the day. And what Rich and I learned was, I'm certain he was not being dishonest. He never knew about the new guys. In all of the confusion and exhaustion, frankly, of the, most of these guys by the time they got to Franklin slept for 24 to 48 hours. He never understood that secondary line was the secondary line. He actually thought it was the main line. And he thought his men had because he knew there was a breakthrough, and he believed that his men had secured it. Most of his men actually knew it because they were up there. And he and Jacob Cox, it destroyed their friendship. These new troops actually destroyed their friendship because Cox knew about them. He knew Mervyn Clark. He'd gone to visit with him, around noon on November 30th because they'd been in the Eastern Theater together. And they bought, there's so much of Franklin's balled up into like this 60-minute like insanity from 4 to 5. And then there's the bludgeoning that goes on for hours afterwards. But in that first hour, the battle turned, and they
stood in that gap. They plugged it. Yeah.
They did. And they're each doing separate things.
Yeah.
175th charges, 44th Missouri holds, 183rd Ohio plugs another breach that William Bates' men had created. So they're all doing different things in the middle of this volcano. And I think I'm probably most proud to say it isn't the book, it's that every day on tour,
we tell their story.
They get talked about a little bit, but that we aren't giving credit and focusing on one person or one unit. We don't focus on one unit here. I think ultimately those 3, and Updike's 7 regiments, and the men of Wagner's division who rallied, those, few thousand men, it's a small number. They were the ones that helped turn Franklin into a Confederate disaster. And they just deserve, I've always believed that no matter who it is, they deserve their
they're doing
their proper place in history.
Yep.
And so they are. They're Bradshaw. I was for a little while I was very enamored with his story,
he's on the cover too.
That he lived so long. I wrote about on the day that he died. It was 1927. So for those of you who like baseball, the 1927 New York Yankees are one of the greatest teams that ever took a field. And on the day that Robert Charles Bradshaw died, Babe Ruth hit one of his 60 home runs.
It's amazing.
Into the bleacher seats at Old Yankee Stadium. And I thought, my goodness.
He straddled this long stretch of history and saw a world that changed markedly.
And the Yankees that day were playing the Washington Senators, who later moved to Minnesota and became my baseball team, the Minnesota Twins. And I thought, this is just really cool, you know, how... Yeah. And these guys just, they did their part. It was the only major battle they were in. Mm-hmm. They went home. They had some reunions. But most of them, just like you, there are veterans walking around right now, old and young and middle-aged.
You wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know. Because they're not looking for something for free. They're not looking for any recognition. Most actually aren't looking for you to say thank you for your service. Mm-hmm. Most actually don't. Mm-hmm. They just go home and try to live their lives in peace. Mm-hmm. When they existed for a short time in a world that was anything but that. Bradshaw said that. Bradshaw said he finally got a reporter at a reunion to ask him, or to inquire, like, you know, what did you have to say? Bradshaw said he didn't really have anything to say. He said, but I do enjoy the quietness of my office where no one's trying to kill me. Mm. And, you know, I think there were more Robert Bradshaws out there than other guys. They just went home and he got married.
Did the next right thing. Raised a family.
Had a little quiet life in St. Joseph, Missouri, where he's buried today north of Kansas City.
All right. So, any last words?
No.
Pick this up in our come hear the story. Come stand where they
buy
stood.
The book, come see it.
It's a good story.
Yeah, and see how guys like this, they're timeless. They really are.
Really are.
They're the old guys sitting at a VFW. They're the old guys buried in cemeteries all over the country. They're the names in memorials like the Vietnam Memorial. They're just... And you know what they really did? I didn't say this. They helped save this country.
Right.
That's probably, for me, a decade on, these were the men who helped save the United States. They helped save the United States from a rebellion, and they were committed to that, and many of them paid, you know, the ultimate price for that. They died at Franklin. So for that, they deserve their place. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.